is based on an error that's having massive consequences.
It is an error, and it's not just an error in the math. The whole concept of defining a tariff solely based on the trade deficit the U.S. has with another country is conceptually flawed. So just on top of that, they made another error, which actually, even if you buy the way that they created this formula, it overstates tariffs by a factor of 4. And in fact, if you applied the right parameters, you would have the vast majority of countries having the minimum 10% tariff, and the maximum tariff would be 14%.
So essentially, whether you have a trade deficit or a trade surplus, you will get slapped with a tariff of 10%. Is that a good way of looking at it?
That is the way that the tariffs have been implemented. Economically, of course, that's not a good way of looking at it. If you really wanted to get reciprocal tariffs, you'd have to do the hard work of figuring out exactly the tariffs that other countries place on the various products that they export into the United States. You'd have to calculate some of the non-tariff trade barriers that they do impose. I actually have heard some of that work was done within the White House, but the president ended up ignoring that analysis and instead decided that the tariff should depend only on the trade deficit with a given country. And the problem is that, while it's true that a trade deficit would depend in part on tariffs, it also depends on a lot of other factors, such as comparative advantage, so what types of goods that a country is particularly positioned to produce and whether the U.S. would be consuming those goods, depends on geography and numerous other factors. And so you really cannot create a formula for a tariff solely based on the trade deficit.
Including international trade flows as well. If you take a look at the tariffs being imposed by the Trump administration, we're looking at 26% for India, where I am right now, 34% for China, 46% for Vietnam, 50% for a small nation like Lesotho, which is among the poorest nation in the continent. I'm just wondering, if you were to remove the error, what kind of tariffs should these countries be implemented with?
Sure. If you remove the error, it's a very easy calculation. Just take whatever the tariff is that the Trump administration published for each country, divide it by 4, and that's essentially your new tariff. And so if you believe, again, their formula, the highest you would have is about 14% or a little bit less than that. Now, I would not suggest that those are the correct tariff rates. I mean, if we're trying to do reciprocal tariffs, which I am not a fan of even, but if you wanted to do that, you again would need to do the work of calculating what their tariffs actually are placing on the U.S., add in the non-tariff barriers, and that would be the right place to start. But I think the president just doesn't think about it in that terms. He believes that if there's a trade deficit with a country, that means that country is cheating us. And that's just not true, especially when you get to some of these lower income countries that just simply are not consuming some of the goods that we're producing, and they get it from other countries. There's a lot of countries out there, and there's a lot of flows between them, and it just doesn't make any sense to punish other countries, first of all, but mostly to punish ourselves. It's going to increase, when we put tariffs on, consumers pay a portion of that increase in prices. It's going to make it harder for businesses to have any certainty in the U.S. About investment decisions, and you end up hurting everybody. And I think that's why you're seeing such a large market reaction in terms of the stock market and in terms of increased probability of entering a recession in the U.S. So this is good for nobody.